You know. All right, we are on Deuteronomy chapter 23, and we are at verse 9. And mine breaks at 14, 9 through 14, and then 15 through 25. Do we just want to read the whole thing?
Might as well.
And finish it out? Okay. Who'd like to volunteer to read?
I'll start and then I'll popcorn somebody.
Okay.
Miscellaneous regulations. When you go to war against your enemies, be sure to stay away from anything that is impure. Any man who becomes ceremonially defiled because of a nocturnal emission must leave the camp and stay away all day. Now, do we want to just figure out what that is now, or do you want to wait until we do the...
He'll probably tell us. One of them will tell us.
Toward evening, he must bathe himself, and at sunset, he may return to the camp. You must have a designated area outside the camp where you can go to relieve yourself. Each of you must have a spade as part of your equipment. Whenever you relieve yourself, dig a hole with the spade and cover the excrement. How do you say that? Excrement?
Excrement.
Excrement.
Yes.
The camp must be holy, for the Lord your God moves around in your camp to protect you and defeat your enemies. He must not see any shameful thing among you, or he will turn away from you. If slaves should escape from their masters and take refuge with you, you must not hand them over to the masters. Let them live among you in any town they choose, and do not oppress them. Popcorn, Julie.
No Israelite man or woman is to become a shrine prostitute. You must not bring the earnings of a female prostitute or of a male prostitute into the house of the Lord your God to pay any vow, because the Lord your God detests them both. Do not charge your brother interest, whether on money or food or anything else that may earn interest. You may charge a foreigner interest, but not a brother Israelite. So the Lord your God may bless you in everything you put your hand to in the land you are entering to possess. If you make a vow to the Lord your God, do not be slow to pay it, for the Lord your God will certainly demand it of you, and you will be guilty of sin. But if you refrain from making a vow, you will not be guilty. Whatever your lips utter, you must be sure to do, because you made your vow freely to the Lord your God with your own mouth. If you enter your neighbor's vineyard, you may eat all the grapes you want, but do not put any in your basket. If you enter your neighbor's grain field, you may pick kernels with your hands, but you must not put a sickle to his standing grain.
My male prostitute calls him a dog.
That's what mine does too. It says a dog.
All right, I have John. Let's see here. 23, 9. John 9 through 14 says, because the camp of Israelite soldiers was a place of God's presence, the camp was to be kept clean. Instruction was given concerning nocturnal emission and defecation. Okay, he's not explaining what nocturnal emission is. Such instruction for external cleanliness illustrated what God wanted in the heart. So that's still in question. 23, 15, and then this covers through 25. Moses selected 21 sample laws to further illustrate the nature of the requirements of living under the Sinaitic covenant. Sample laws. I think that's an interesting word. Let's see if there's further instruction on that. 15 and 16. If usually a slave was not to be turned over to his master, evidently this has in mind a slave from the Canaanites or other neighboring nations who was driven out by oppression or with a desire to know Israel's God. 17 and 18. Prostitution was a form of, as a form of worship, was forbidden. A dog was a reference to male prostitutes. You can look at Revelation 22:15. I don't remember that in Revelation. 22:15. We had it marked as low moral people in 22:15. 19 and 20. This prohibition of lending money at interest to a fellow Israelite is qualified by Exodus 22:25 and Leviticus 25:35 and 36, which indicates that it restricts its application to the poor and further prevents impoverishment. But it was allowed for foreigners who were engaged in trade and commerce to enlarge their wealth. According to Deuteronomy 15:1 and 2, it is also clear that money can be legitimately lent in the normal course of business, subject to forgiveness of all unpaid debt in the sabbatical year. Chapter 24, verse 15. I'm trying to remember what that 19 and 20. Everybody charges interest now. 21 through 23. To me, you would just be borrowing then, I guess. 21 through 20. Though vows were voluntary, they were promptly kept once made. Numbers 30, verse 2. 24 and 25. Farmers were to share their produce with people in the land, but the people were not to profit from the farmer's generosity. I think that's a good rule to have. If you have extra, share it.
Yeah.
But doesn't mean that, like, I'm just thinking of certain people like that would think, oh, I can just come to your house and fill my basket and not have to go to work.
That would be kind of like my neighbors years ago. Frank had told them they could come and get some strawberries when we had strawberries, or rhubarb when we had extra. And they came and cleaned the patch off and then sold them.
No.
Oh, yes, they did.
That's why people think you're being mean when you're like, listen, you can come get my strawberries, but, don't take too much. They think you're being ignorant, but just people like that just don't have common sense that that's not appropriate.
Well, it was after that Frank said, I'd rather have them sit there and rot than
Give them any more.
Yeah.
Some people though are gluttons, consumers, and not givers.
When Mary Jane Slavin was alive, she would come and just go back to the garden and, pick whatever tomato she needed just for her own consumption. But she thought of us as one of her kids anyway, so it didn't matter. And I planted a yellow tomato plant just for him. So she felt comfortable enough to come and
She
pick what she needed.
Though. Yeah.
Huh?
She didn't
Yeah.
strip your vines.
No.
Okay, Kathy, whenever you're ready.
And these people that did that were the unworldly people.
Looking to make a buck.
Yeah. Okay. Nine to 14, sanctifying the army camp. This section applied to Israel's soldiers when they were encamped away from home. The basic principle was that they treat the camp as they would their land at home. For the Lord was with them even on the battlefield, walking in their midst. The idol-worshipping nations believed that they left their gods behind when they went to another country. But Israel's God was always with them, for he is the God of all the earth. If the soldier had become unclean at home, he would have to leave the community, wash, and return the next day, and that same rule applied to the camp. I have a note here. Verse 10 describes something unforeseen that happened at night over which the man had no control.
So like a wet dream?
That's what I'm thinking.
That's what I'm thinking too.
But it made the man
probably pee
unclean.
himself.
Huh?
He probably didn't pee himself.
I don't think so.
What if he had diarrhea in the night
Well, that's possible too.
and couldn't get out to bury it?
But ejaculation would be considered unclean.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
It could have been a bodily emission, and there's a reference to Leviticus 15:16, or defilement from touching something unclean, and it has 22:4-9. Now, I don't know if that means in Deuteronomy or Leviticus. Let me
15:16 says, here you go. If a man has an emission of semen, he shall bathe his whole body in water and be unclean until evening. Well, that would slow him down a little bit, wouldn't it? You know, they weren't allowed to touch a woman either for a week before and after their period. You got a 2-week break.
wow.
wondering how there's any men in the camp.
Maybe they were all old. 22:4-9. That talks about, it goes back to some unclean stuff. So maybe that's what that reference was in Deuteronomy. Because it said, or defilement from touching something unclean. Okay. The men were also to have a place outside the camp for disposing of their excrement. This would not only keep them from being defiled, but it would also promote hygiene. No matter where we go, God goes with us, and we must not think that we can disobey him and get away with it. God's admonition is keep away from everything impure. Whether we're on vacation or away from home on business, the Lord watches us and desires us to be as careful where we're unknown as we are where we're known. Moses was on holy ground.
Hang on a second, Kathy. Janet, do you have that coming through in 2 places?
What?
Do you have the sound coming through 2 things?
I don't think so.
I'm going to mute you.
So
Just
I'll mute
because,
myself.
I'm just going to mute you because there's feedback coming through, but you know how to unmute yourself if you want to talk, right? Oh, you already muted yourself. Never mind. Sorry, Kathy, go ahead.
Let's see where we were. Whether we're on vacation or away from home on business, the Lord watches us and desires us to be as careful where we're unknown as we are where we're known. Moses was on holy ground in Midian, and there's a reference to Exodus, as was Joshua standing near Jericho, and a reference to Joshua. Verses 15 and 16, sharing with the poor and needy. This collection of laws relates to opportunities that the Jews would have to show kindness and generosity to both humans and animals. Contrary to the laws of other nations, the law of Israel allowed the Jews to harbor fugitive slaves and protect them. These slaves would not be Jewish because the Jews were not allowed to enslave their brothers. Jewish servants were either released in the Sabbath year or would agree to serve willingly for life.
Did they have a reference there where they were not allowed to enslave their brothers?
Well, there's a reference here. It's chapter 15, verses 12-18.
Because they did, remember in Isaiah? In 12-18, you shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and you shall be careful to observe the statutes. 12-18?
Yeah.
Okay, then it goes into keeping the feasts. 3 times a year, all your males shall appear before the Lord. They shall not appear before every man shall give as he is able. I don't know why that goes through 18. You shall appoint judges. I don't know why that would go through 18. Okay, go ahead.
Also, Jewish masters were not allowed to abuse their servants so that they would want to flee. These fugitives would be from the surrounding nations, and assisting them would give the Jews opportunity to tell them about the God of Israel. Jews were not permitted to charge interest when they loaned money or produce to their brothers, but they could charge foreigners. And that's talking about verses 19 to 20. And then it says also there's a reference to Exodus and Leviticus.
That's interesting because remember in Isaiah that the priests were taxing the brother like up to 40% and then taking their children as slaves because they couldn't afford to pay it. So right here, Moses, it was, I mean, they were clearly that, no wonder God was so angry.
The blessing God would send the lender would far surpass the interest he would make on the loan. This is another example of the principle expressed in Matthew 6:33. If a lender needed collateral for a loan, he wasn't permitted to take the borrower's millstones. And that has a reference to Deuteronomy 24:6. Because the man needed them in order to feed himself and his family. The lender was not to demean the borrower by going into his house to secure the pledge. And if that pledge was the man's cloak, the borrower had to return it by sunset. A reference to Exodus. Business transactions between Jewish brethren were to be humane and compassionate, to help the needy brother and not to enrich the lender. The farmer was to leave some gleanings for the poor during the time of harvest. And that goes references Deuteronomy 24:19 to 22, and then Leviticus. This would give the aliens, orphans, and widows opportunity to gather food in a dignified way and not be forced to beg. As with the lender, so with the generous farmer. God would bless him in his work and reward him for his kindness to the poor. Reference to Psalms and Proverbs. It is more blessed to give than to receive. Acts 20:35. This generosity should extend to one's animals. And it references Deuteronomy 25:4. To muzzle the ox, that is threshing the grain, is to frustrate him and make his work unnecessarily painful. Once again, the Lord shows compassion for animals and urges us to show pity on those under our care. A righteous man regards the life of his animal, but the tender mercies of the wicked are cruel. Reference to Proverbs. Paul used this verse to teach that those who labor in the gospel should be supported by God's people.
What was that Proverbs reference to animals?
12:10.
We should make a list of these for Stan. Every time we run into one about animals.
Paul used this verse to teach that those who labor in the gospel should be supported by God's people. And there's references to 2 Corinthians and 1 Timothy. Verses 17 and 18. Fulfilling religious vows. The subject of vows is discussed also in Leviticus 27 and Numbers 30. A Jew could make a vow to give the Lord something or do something for him in return for a special blessing. The vow could also involve abstaining from something in order to please the Lord. Vows were purely voluntary. Deuteronomy 23:22, and they had to be declared openly and fulfilled obediently. Whatever was promised had to be brought to the sanctuary and given to the Lord. There's a reference to Ecclesiastes. To make the promise and not keep it be taking the Lord's name in vain. References to Exodus and Proverbs. However, no vow could be paid to the Lord with money earned by committing sin. Playing the harlot is a euphemism for idolatry. There's a reference to Exodus. Because the pagan shrines did offer worshippers female and male prostitutes. in parentheses, it has dogs for the male prostitute. No Jewish man or woman was ever to become a shrine prostitute, and no vow could be paid to the Lord with the hire of a prostitute. We don't do evil that good may come from it. Reference to Romans. All money is defiled in a sense. Paul and Peter both called it filthy lucre. And there's references to 1 Timothy, Titus, and 1 Peter. But some money is especially filthy because of its origin. And I think from there we are into chapter 24.
Okay. Tony says, 9 through 14, throughout the Pentateuch, we've seen many times how seriously God took every detail of his people's lives, even their camp hygiene. This was a righteous way to be cleansed from bodily emission and to dispose of daily waste in order to keep the camp ceremonially clean so that holy God could dwell among his people. 15 and 16. The Lord wanted a particular group, fugitive slaves, to feel welcome in the Israelite camp. These were not most likely slaves who had escaped from the nations. These were most likely slaves who had escaped from the nations surrounding Israel. The righteous thing to do was to give these people sanctuary rather than returning them to their masters, even letting them live where they wished in the cities to which they fled. Which I find it interesting that even today, like evil men use this to try and take down our country. Because you have the people who are saying, well, the Bible says people, we should take them in, but they're literally established groups being paid to come as fugitives. 17 and 18. Cult prostitution involving both genders was prevalent in Canaan. So Moses had to continually warn Israel not to be tempted by this heinous evil or patronize a Canaanite cult prostitute. Furthermore, they were not to bring a prostitute's wages into the house of the Lord. Such wicked forms of worship, whether one was visiting a cult prostitute or acting as one, were contrary to the sexual ethic the Lord had established. 19 and 20. The law's command to Israel to love your neighbor as yourself came into focus again in the matter of charging interest on a loan. God did not allow an Israelite to charge interest to a fellow Israelite, although it was acceptable to charge interest to a foreigner. So they couldn't make money off of each other, but they could outsiders. 21 through 23, vows to God were completely voluntary, but once made, they were to be kept, or else it was counted against the person as sin. And then 24 and 25, an Israelite could also love his neighbor by not taking advantage of his vineyard or standing grain. It was acceptable to pluck grapes or heads of grain to eat while on the neighbor's property, but this did not give anyone license to show up with a sickle and a container and start harvesting. Are they still your neighbor, Kathy?
Yes.
You could send them this verse and say, is our Bible the same? That's the end. I had a thought too this morning about the men and the whole sexual thing. Like we had that discussion about like it seemed like the woman got the rough end of the deal on all of that. But I got to think about that and I thought the men are ultimately the one that stands before God and held responsible. So if they dishonored a woman or mistreated her or whatever, at the end of the day, they would be held responsible for that.
I guess that's true. Not necessarily from, it would be from God, not necessarily from their like male
Right, on
peers
earth.
or something,
Right.
but yeah.
But
Yeah.
I guess so on the other hand, I'm thinking like even how men treat women today, not all of them, but like they do it in the name of the Lord. It's like, so if they're doing that, if they're mistreating a woman, like they don't really care about what God thinks anyway. And maybe God would take out their husband. Like he did, was it Nahum? Someone who was an evil man that would not give David food. And the wife was wise, and the wife negotiated.
with David.
Yeah.
David
then-
married her.
Yeah. Because God took out the husband then for being a butt.
Yep.
Well, and we were reading too about, not taxing people, or, you can't take, if you take the guy's coat, you have to give it back before sunset. Like it's going to get cold, so he's going to have it. Or you can't take whatever he needs to
Make a
provide for,
living.
right, provide for his family. And when you think about it, we're so far away from that now. I mean, look how many people lose their homes. And I get the fact that some people don't handle their money wisely. I get that happens. But if you have somebody who is just inundated with bills, whether it be medical bills or look at the military personnel that are homeless, and it's like they can't get a break, or there's nothing done to help them.
Yeah, I think the problem has become that, first of all, we've gotten so far away from what God said about lending and borrowing and handling of money. We've gotten so far away from that people are allowed to be irresponsible. And I think too, if you're like, well, if I borrow, or if I'm going to say, let you borrow money from me, can you reasonably pay that back in 7 years? Or am I going to get stuck with it? I would be much more cautious about how much I let you borrow. But then I think too, like if someone gets sick or something unfortunate happens, that's when the community comes around and everybody pitches in. But there's so many people that abuse the system now. Like your friends
Yeah.
should be friends with a clean heart, coming over and cleaning out like you did all the work, and like how can they not even have a conscience to know that that wasn't appropriate for them to come do that? Like,
And if you try to
people
give,
that abuse the system, and it's like having discernment between who's abusing the kindness and the love and the generosity and who actually needs the kindness and the love and the generosity.
right. And sometimes I think it looks like maybe we don't help somebody, and somebody else from the distance, like you might be looking at like, well, why didn't I give Lori help? Well, maybe I knew how Lori was and she just abused it. And
The
so,
consequence of her own choices.
right. So I'm not going to help her, and it may look bad to somebody else.
You don't want
so
to go fund me?
Well, I don't know. Depends what you want to go funded for.
I haven't been seeing that as much lately. I wonder if that was like a fad that,
No, it's still out there. I saw they put one together for the Egoff family.
oh, did they?
Which I think is a good thing for the right conditions. But like
Yeah.
I had a friend in high school, and she started dating her husband when she was 13. They both were into drugs. They both were it was a very abusive, volatile relationship. They both were at the bar every single weekend. She ended up passing away. I mean, he knocked all of her teeth out. Like it was so abusive. And when she passed away, the daughter was like, everyone who knows my mama, like, we didn't have any. And it's like, I'm sorry, but you live this lifestyle, and now you have absolutely no money to take care of your mom. I'm not going to support that. Sorry.
Well, and Chrissy, you might remember this too. I remember the one Israel trip you guys were taking, and a certain person
Mm-hmm.
did a GoFundMe page to get money to pay for a trip to Israel. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can't even afford to send me.
I don't know about that.
Oh, you don't?
Was it the one that didn't go?
Yes. And I thought, I can't even afford to send me. And you want to do a GoFundMe page for me to pay for you to go. So when you say help support, well, it depends what you mean help with, I mean.
Well, and I feel that way. Like, I mean, sometimes you feel like you're being ignorant, but I feel like, our cars have 240,000 miles on them because we don't want a car payment. You know what I mean? Our house is a reasonable house and a reasonable payment because that's what we can afford. Like, so if someone chooses to go buy a $500,000 home and that makes it so they can't have a steak on Saturday, that was their choice. If they have no savings because they have all these extra toys, that's their choice. I don't. Mm-mm. So just, I guess, discerning about, what truly is a need. And what is taking someone on as your responsibilities. And I think too,
Chris-
like the Lord wants us to help people, but not to take them on as responsibility. Like they got to get to a place where they then crawl out of the hole and become responsible and give back into the community themselves. Yeah. Yes, Julie.
Did you say they did a GoFundMe for the family who lost their home in the fire?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I saw it yesterday.
Now, see, that kind of GoFundMe,
Yeah.
I'm 100% for,
Yeah. Me too.
but not to take a trip to Israel.
No, that's a choice. That's like
Yes.
people want, my girlfriend wants a, $100,000 diamond. So I'm doing this GoFundMe to, no,
No.
there's people starving in the world. Like, no. And I think I'm a little more hard-hearted about too, because I've been on my own since I was 17 and I've raised my own money since I'm 12. So it's like, there's a point where you have to be responsible for your choices and no one was going to come save me. Like I had to be responsible. I think, like people don't have any money, but they're walking around with a $1,500 cell phone and a pack of cigarettes. Well, then you're not really that broke.
And they get their nails done all the time.
I
That
had
kills
that
me.
situation too, where someone wanted us to help them with their house payment, which by the way, their house payment was $1,400. She made over 6 figures a year. So they obvious irresponsibility. They found a church that was giving them their house payment, this $1,400, but she was late going to the appointment to pick up the money because she was getting her nails done.
Mm-mm-mm.
That's a slap in the face to whoever's trying to help them.
Yeah, and so people think you're being mean, and it's like, no. Saying no to you is not being mean. It's like forcing you to grow up and be responsible. It's not, you can't take care of everybody, but there are people who have true needs, and that's who we need to help.
That's the really sad part. The people that really need it, that get it for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I don't think we'll move on today. It's only 10:19, but
Did you read, Tony?
yeah. Yes, I did.
Where were you?
Praying. She was praying.
She was watching her fig tree grow.
Her fig tree that she's named Jude. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, any other side notes or anything anybody wants to share from their Bibles?
Mm-mm.
Pretty straightforward.
All right. Well, then this concludes the reading of God's word for today, and we'll see everybody Monday morning. I did put it in.
Kimmy.
Except for Kim.
That's
I'll
Kimmy.
see you all Tuesday.
All right. See you Tuesday, Kim. Hope you feel better.
Thank you.
Yeah, better, Kim.
Yeah.
Thank you.